and I am honored to speak once again at the National Association of State Procurement Officials Law Institute. And as Megan noted in that really, really kind introduction, I'm the director of the Procurement Collusion Strike Force at the U.S. Department of Justice. And if you've been to one of these before, as you hear those words, you may have in mind the old Yogi Berra quip. It's like deja vu all over again, because yes, I have returned to talk about collusion risks, infrastructure, and the ways we can work together. And I too feel that sense of deja vu all over again, because it was 2 years ago at the NASPO Law Institute when the night before I was scheduled to go on, the President of the United States signed a bill into law, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or EIJA. And I will confess that late that night, I had to scrap much of what I'd prepared to say in order to address the breaking news, due in no small part to more than a handful of you saying, "Are you going to talk about this thing that's happening in D.C.?" Luckily, last night, this morning, and today, no such signing ceremonies have happened, and I can stick to my prepared remarks. So let me first start with a confession. I must confess that I am humbled to find myself in a room full of real procurement experts. You all play a key role in delivering value to the people we are sworn to serve. And although I'm the head of a strike force that has procurement in its name, I must be clear about one thing. I am not a procurement expert. I am not a procurement lawyer. I am, by training and experience, a criminal prosecutor, one whose practice has, over the course of many years, become specialized in a particular set of crimes that target and victimize governmental units when they go into the market to buy goods and services. And while I recognize that you are the true procurement experts, I think we probably have at least one thing in common: our shared collective goal to ensure that every single tax dollar designated for public spending goes into public projects and not into fraudsters' pockets. So therefore today, I'm going to try to limit myself to those areas where I'm not in too deep a water. I'll describe a little bit of the work the Procurement Collusion Strike Force, or I'm going to call it the PCSF, or the Strike Force, some of the work the PCSF has done over its first few years. In fact, we are celebrating our 4th anniversary next week in Washington. And in case you're curious, the traditional 4th anniversary gift is an appliance. So if anyone has a lead on a good air fryer, I'm all ears. But aside from talking about the work that my team has been doing, I also want to offer some thoughts on how you, the procurement professionals, lawyers from offices of general counsels, attorneys general, can help address the collusion risks that have undoubtedly grown since the last time we were together. In fact, addressing the risks, that's really the very reason the Department of Justice created the PCSF in fall of 2019. We knew then from our experience as investigators, as prosecutors, that criminal conspirators have long targeted government spending on goods and services. The governments that suffer are truly victims of economic crime. It's really a form of fraud. It's theft of tax dollars. And ultimately, the taxpayers themselves are victimized. And these economic crimes have a devastating effect not just on the public fisc, the public purse, but on the economy more broadly. To put some kind of number on it, governments around the world pay 20% more because of bid rigging, price fixing, and other collusive schemes. That's 20% worldwide. And I will tell you, based on my experience, I have no reason to believe the United States is an outlier either way. Not a case of American exceptionalism, except for maybe in some parts of our country, including my hometown of Chicago, which I would venture to say pays somewhere north of a 20% collusion tax. 20%. Imagine what your state could do for its people if it didn't lose 20% to collusion. This risk and the very real resulting harm are why my colleagues and I exist, using the antitrust laws and other federal criminal statutes to protect competition and encourage a fair fight in the marketplace. And I am so proud of the work that we have done. And I want to be clear, the work that everyone on the strike force has done. I'm just the guy who's the director. It's really the men and women of law enforcement, as they used to say for the Cops TV show. They are the ones really doing the work. And as I think back on our first 4 years, I'm in awe. I'm in awe of all that they have been able to do. We have shown truly impressive results in a short time, and frankly, during a pandemic. Let's not forget that COVID was a couple of years. In that time, the PCSF has expanded twice. We now have teams in 22 districts around the country. Teams consisting of prosecutors and representatives from law enforcement, federal, state, and local, including those belonging to our 11 national partners. Together, including in cooperation with state attorneys general, we have reached thousands, more than 30,000 agents, auditors, analysts, procurement officials and professionals, and those in the private sector, all in an effort to deter crime through education and awareness. And I wish I could report that's all we had to do. I wish our job were done there. However, to paraphrase James Madison, humans are no angels. And so long as no amount of moral or legal education can fully eradicate human vice, avarice, and greed, law enforcement will have a job to do. And since our founding, we have done that job. To take just a few examples, a bid rigging and bribery scheme that targeted construction projects at California's Department of Transportation. A wire fraud scheme that targeted auctions for vehicles at the New York MTA. A years-long bid rigging and fraud conspiracy involving more than 300 contracts with the state of North Carolina. And an attempt to carve up the market for publicly funded highway repairs in Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Nebraska. As you might notice, and this is no accident, all of the examples I just listed are examples or cases where state or local governments were the victims of the schemes, making them pretty relevant to all of you. And all of those cases involved agencies that directly or indirectly receive federal funding. And there's the connect. Because this leads me to the transformative, albeit looming, federal funding of EJA, the Infrastructure Act, which promises $1.2 trillion, with a T, $1.2 trillion in spending over the next several years. Money that's going to start in the US Treasury, make a stop or two at a federal cabinet level department, and ultimately, and in the whole main, be given to the states. Go out, states, pave some roads, build an EV charging network, make your electrical grid more resilient. So that $1.2 trillion, if we apply that 20% number I mentioned earlier, that's $240 billion in funding that could be at risk. That's a lot of money. And the projects are starting. To date, over 20,000 projects have been awarded funding from EJA. They range from repaving roads, water system upgrades, massive bridge projects, massive transit projects. Our host city right here, New Orleans, our host city is going to spend $71 million to improve its public transit and purchase zero emissions vehicles. New Orleans is going to spend $24 million to build its downtown transit center and $25 million to construct 2 ferry boats. Zooming out a bit, the state of Louisiana is expected to receive EJA funding for clean water, $231 million. Broadband expansion, $1.4 billion. And clean energy, $443 million, to name just a few categories. Now, to meet this moment, the DOJ and the strike force are dedicating more resources and resharpening our focus. Last year, we expanded to include 4 additional national law enforcement partners that have critical oversight roles for Aegis spending, as well as additional spending, which I won't even get into, contemplated by 2 other large bills that are now laws. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, or the IRA, and the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors, or the CHIPS Act. We've also added some resources at headquarters. We've promoted Sandra Talbot to Deputy Director, Michael Sawyers to Assistant Deputy Director for Federal Spending, Brian Serino to a similar role for our global initiative, and Jamie Collins to Program Manager. These talented professionals, working with the prosecutors, paralegals from the Antitrust Division, the U.S. Attorney's offices, and our 11 national law enforcement partners, we are all redoubling our collaborative efforts across the law enforcement community. We're looking for new ways to join forces with our partners and any other agency looking to root out fraud and collusion in the procurement process. We're conducting proactive investigations. We're taking aggressive investigative steps, most of which I can't go into detail today. But we are well positioned for continued success in our 5th year. But in order to be successful, we will need your help. We will need partners, new and existing, in this fight against collusion, bid rigging, and related crimes, all threatening to subvert the competitive process and putting at risk the opportunity to improve and transform infrastructure in the United States. So while it may be deja vu all over again, the department, the strike force, and I are asking for your help. We recognize you are busy, and that almost all of you are trying to do more with less. You've dedicated your careers to, and are now leaders at, the offices and agencies responsible for obtaining the goods and services that governmental units need to function. And I know that much of the pressure you feel is to get the project done on time, under budget, to spec, and not running afoul of a single complicated regulation. And while I've never done your job, I suspect it is on those metrics that you and your teams are evaluated and judged, sometimes fairly, sometimes not so fairly, by the public, the press, and elected officials. But if I may be so bold and a little annoying, I want to suggest one additional metric for your evaluation: detection of bid rigging and collusion. Your teams are on the front lines of detection and are often in the best position to observe these schemes as they develop. Your teams, the people you lead, are best positioned to spot red flags and report them. To be clear, procurement professionals play a key role in the prevention, detection, investigation, and prosecution of these crimes. So, if your agency does not do so already, I encourage you to make this role explicit. Make it part of your work plans and performance reviews for your frontline staff and management. Reward these efforts. If someone comes to you and says, I think I have a problem, welcome that feeling. Welcome them in. And if they do find something, it should be a factor when they're considered for promotion or whatever other rewards you can have, just as much as on time, under budget, to spec, and according to reg. Because ultimately, when they do so, they can save everyone some money. Now, I'm not alone in this suggestion. An international NGO has put out a recommendation that procurement agencies around the world, quote, consider adequate incentives for procurement officials to prevent and detect bid rigging, such as an explicit inclusion of prevention and detection of bid rigging among the duties and training of procurement officials. I bet a lot of you do that. And they also, quote, rewarding the successful detection of anti-competitive practices in the professional performance evaluation of procurement officials. I wonder how much that's happening. And during our Q&A, you should feel free to tell me that it's happening and that I'm wrong. But at root, what I'm asking is that if your staffs see something, that you, as the leadership in the 50 states, that you empower them, you encourage them, you incentivize them to say something internally. And then, using whatever process you have, report it to us. I want to be clear, we do not need full, unequivocal proof of a crime to accept a lead or open an investigation. A call to me and my colleagues is not getting a jury to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. It is, do I have something here? Something is suspicious. I'm seeing something in the bids. It's whatever that tip, whatever that lead is, that's what we need. We need and want your tips and leads. And in exchange, we vow to investigate with every justifiable resource that we have at our disposal. If we work together and if we're successful in that partnership, we will send a message to the public, and more importantly, to wannabe, would-be, potential fraudsters. The government programs are not easy targets. We can, together, tell fraudsters that they pilfer government programs at their peril. I look forward to our discussion. I look forward to your questions, and I want to thank you again and thank NASWA again for having me. Thank you.
Dan, will you join me in the living room?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is not like my Nana's living room because there's no plastic on the cushions.
Yeah, we don't have any Afghans either. All right. Oh, these are nice.
Yeah, very comfortable.
All right, Dan. First, let me see if there are any questions from the audience. Does anyone have a burning question they want to ask Dan before I get started? Oh, we got one up here. Meg. Right here.
To piggyback off the last point you were making, what are some things to be looking for?
So what are the red flags?
What are the red flags?
Yeah, so that could be a session on its own. It's a good question. I would break this into a few different categories. Start with sort of the market conditions, sort of the kind of places where this happens, where these kind of conspiracies in secret among and between competitors happen. Look in places where there is consolidation. There aren't many players. What does not many mean? Probably less than 5, maybe as few as two or 3. Because in many ways it's easier to start a secret conspiracy among 3 people than it is 50. Look at markets. Look at segments of the market where there are a lot of barriers to entry. So whether it costs a lot of money to get into the business. So for example, asphalt, concrete. It takes money to build an asphalt plant or a concrete plant. Or there are regulatory barriers to entry. And again, I'm not picking on asphalt and concrete, but there are environmental regulations and licenses you have to face. Look at products that are essentially commodities. A screw is a screw is a screw. A nail is a nail is a nail. I know there are differences in length, and there's Phillips head and things like that, but sort of ultimately where you're competing mostly on price and on very not much else, nothing specialized, that can be a place where these sorts of things can arise. Conversely, look at markets or specs where things have become so specialized that the spec can be written in such a way that only one company can win. So that's sort of look at the market. The next thing is, and this is information you have, look at sort of information in the pricing. In the pricing and in the bids. Look for pricing that's all going up roughly the same amount at roughly the same time without a reason for doing so in the market. And I don't mean to pick on asphalt, but if all the asphalt prices go up at the same time at roughly the same amount, and the spot price for light sweet crude oil goes up, well, that makes sense because crude oil and the refining thereof is one of the key component processes to getting to asphalt. Okay, yeah, the prices are all going to go up. But if they're all going up and there's nothing else, that's something. Look at the history and pattern of bids. If it looks as though they're taking turns among a handful of vendors, or the market shares seem unshakably steady, or when you're doing your market research and learning who's in the market, you don't get RFP responses from companies that you would expect to. You can look, if you use, and this could really be an hour, if you have any kind of e-procurement platform, there's all sorts of things in the metadata. This part's not being recorded, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
No recording.
So, and this is from a real case, if 3 different contractors all submit their bids at roughly around the same time, one's located in Pennsylvania, one's located in Missouri, and one's located in Texas, but they've logged on to your e-procurement site and it returns to the same Comcast node in Missouri. The map is now up, that's helpful. That's a huge red flag because that suggests people are working together. So that's sort of like the transition from pricing to anything else that suggests people are working together. It could be the IP logs that you keep from your e-procurement database. It could be metadata. It could be metadata on a Word doc or a PDF doc. It could be something in an Excel doc. If in an Excel document, if it's something that it's vendor created and the formulas are exactly the same. My brother is an accountant, and he once said that Excel formulas are like jazz. Everyone does it a little bit differently. And that's what accountants think is funny. But there's something to be said for that. If it's something more than like some A1 to A132. And then sort of like the last category is sort of, these can be bucketed as sort of stupid criminal tricks. These are the type of things that show people are working together. I had an example once where, and it was my home state of Illinois, and it wasn't that long ago, and they were still taking bids on paper, actually written out on paper, and the handwriting was identical. The handwriting was identical except for the certification of non-collusion and the signatures on the bids. The handwriting was identical. Look for that sort of thing. We also have a classic example where 2 envelopes come into GSA. They're clearly torn from the same roll. Anything that shows people are working together, sort of like the dumb mistakes people make. Other things you can look for are competitors like stonewalling you and sort of like refusing to give you a price in a way that doesn't make any sense, or sending you to a competitor. If people are talking, in sort of in the main, and I know there are going to be lots of exceptions to this, if you're hearing about sort of an industry-wide price list, that would be a concern. That would be something suspicious. So that's sort of a handful of red flags. And I want to be clear, what I have described, for the most part, are red flags. It's not proof positive that a crime has occurred and that this person did it, but it's a red flag. It bears a little further analysis. It bears a little further look. It could be, these prices are, they're all moving in lockstep and they all seem to take turns. Let me see what I can find out, and sort of, you maybe take a look and you see that, boy, these IP logs are all coming back to the same place. That's, now we're in probable cause land. I mean, we are.
So we had a question that sort of asked to walk through an like a very simple example of bid rigging, how something like that might work. Okay,
yeah. There are a few different ways it can work, but it all is premised on the classic concept of the sealed bid that I think everyone here should be familiar with, and a lot of us sort of are deviating from in all sorts of different ways. The request for bids goes out, and what will happen is 2 or more competitors will decide, well, we're going to put the fixes in and we're going to do it. So I would say to my competitor, Megan, I need to get the state of Louisiana contract for this quarter. I really need to get it. I need to make my number. I need you to come in higher. Here's my price. Come in higher, and I'll get you on the next one. So a few different things are happening there. One, the agreement is the crime. Once we've agreed, we actually have a 10-year felony. She's agreed to fix the price and rig the bid at 10% higher than mine. I've agreed to rotate the bid so that the next one she can win. And then what often happens is we'll have a series of communications, helpfully done through corporate email, although less so these days, where we talk about all of this. And I may, because I need to make the number, and I know Megan's busy, I may fill out all the paperwork, all the forms for her, and tell her she just needs to put it on her letterhead. The prices are already 10% higher. That's a real example from 2017. That sort of thing has happened. So that's sort of like your basic bid rigging. And what it is sort of the competitors trying to decide in advance who's going to win and at what price, and depriving the purchasing agency of the benefit of competition. Because what happens when there's competition, when people are actually trying to win in like an untilted marketplace, they'll cut prices. They will improve. Their price may not be lower, but their product is better. And what Megan and I have decided to do is that we're not going to play that game. We're going to try to stay fat, happy, and sassy through bid rigging or price fixing. It can get a lot more complicated. Megan and I could decide that I want the state of Louisiana, she wants Kentucky and Tennessee, and so we've carved up the market like that geographically. That's our sort of basic agreement. And then what we'll do is we'll probably either we'll put in like fake bids with higher numbers, those are called complimentary or dummy bids, or we might suppress bids where Megan won't bid in Louisiana and I won't bid in Kentucky pursuant to our agreement, and we keep our geographic markets the way they're supposed to be. Or we could say, listen, our agreement is we want to keep our market share 60-40, that's where we are, we want to keep it that way, and sort of we push the prices up to keep the markets there. And this happens everywhere. It happens in literally every city and state. It happens in every kind of industry. It has happened for decades. And I would love to believe, the dream and goal of every person who's in law enforcement is that we'll do our job so well that we'll put ourselves out of a job. Like, that's our actual mission. I also know that, like I said, humans are no angels, and that is highly unlikely. So until humans become angels, we're here to investigate and prosecute. But we are trying to push this forward.
So along those lines, I've gotten several questions, I'm going to kind of combine them. Is there a type of procurement that is more susceptible to this than others, and specifically when price is the sole deciding factor?
There's one type of procurement where we have seen over time a lot of issues, and that's the rush or emergency job. Whether it's the rush emergency job here in New Orleans post-Katrina, or in California after the wildfires, or the rush emergency job that was COVID. What we have seen time and time again is that when the urgency and emergency is there, the guardrails go down. And listen, in some ways as they should, but as those guardrails go down, the bad things happen, man. I mean, that's some of what happens. And I'm not so daft as to say to the chief procurement officer in the city of New Orleans after Katrina that, well, have you filled out the form in triplicate and checked every box when what they're trying to do is get animal carcasses and human remains off the streets in Treme? Like, I get it. Like, the guardrails do have to go down. But when they have gone down, that's where we've seen a lot of problems. Yeah, I think that's probably the best answer. It's not really talking about price, but that's definitely a place. And I mean, the various forms of COVID, and this is like a little outside my lane, but like the various forms of pandemic relief likely are the biggest single fraudulent activity in the history of the United States, in large part because we were in this crazy state of, do you remember spring 2020? We're in this crazy state of emergency, and there was just so much happening, and there wasn't as much time to sort of cross the T's and dot the I's.
Yeah, and it's easy to look back on that now and be very critical, right?
Oh, yeah.
But we were just doing
Monday
the
morning
best we
quarterbacking
could.
is, yeah, right.
Right.
I mean, that's, yeah. So, I mean, I think, and listen, I'm a criminal prosecutor, so my job is historical. It is, in a lot of ways, looking back. But I also think about sort of like, what are the takeaways? What can we learn? What can we do better? And I mean, I think there are a lot of lessons. I mean, the part I didn't say up there about 2 years ago is one of your colleagues came up to me and said, Biden's going to sign this thing tonight, and it's going to be like COVID, only worse. What are you guys going to do to help us? And that's why I'm like, okay, I really have to go back and like really think through what lessons can we learn? Can we learn from that? And I certainly don't have all the answers, but.
Yeah. And I know we've still got some more questions, but I want to talk a little bit about what happens when one of our attorneys or procurement officers calls your office and says, hey, I smell something funny. What happens next? What should they expect?
Yeah. So what it really is it starts with probably just a discussion. We'll ask just sort of generally, what are you seeing? What are your suspicions? What do you have? We may, and you can see on the map, we have teams, in various parts of the country. I may try to connect you with someone who actually does the work as close to you as possible, as soon as possible, and it may come in sort of like come in for a meeting, give us your presentation as to what it is you're seeing. By presentation, I don't mean like a formal presentation, but sort of come in, let's talk. You want to show me some documents? Show me some documents. Maybe we'll have an FBI agent there, or Department of Transportation IG agent if it's a transportation thing, and we'll sort of talk through what you have. And there are times, a good number of times, where a call comes in where someone sees something and it's sort of, I'm not sure what you have, but it's not a crime, and so I wish you the best. Or I'm not sure what you have, I think it's a crime, but sort of like here's the lane my team works in, and what you're describing what you're describing is honestly probably public integrity, public corruption. You're talking about like an elected official abusing the legislative process. That's an actual example. That there's really nothing the antitrust laws, or for the most part fraud laws, can do. But I work at the Department of Justice. I have a whole bunch of friends who that's all they do. So let me connect you with that person. So what I like to do is sort of like, sometimes the answer is no, but it's kind of like improv rules, like, no, but, or I guess, no. Improv rules are yes and. This would be like no, but let me take you to someone who can. But let's say the answer is yes, like, okay, yeah, you have given me some information that makes me think there's some price fixing or bid rigging happening. As soon as possible, I'm going to try to get you to like the line attorney who is actually doing the work with agents. We'll open some form of investigation. We'll have an investigative plan, and it may be asking you to provide us with, the contract files, which we'll take a look at. It may be sort of, and it'll likely be broader than sort of the one, if you're coming in on one contract, because these crimes are iterative. They take time. They have multiple pieces. I've said before, like, bid rigging is not a crime of passion. It's not. It's not done in hot blood, and it generally
Premeditated, would you say?
Premeditated, hot blood. It's generally sort of iterative and happen over time. So what you may have is one or two contracts, 3 or 4 contracts that you think are something hinky is happening. We may say, well, can you take us back 5 years? Get us more information. And we'll go from there. And there will be times when you're working with a criminal investigation where there's not as much we can say that we'd like to say, just because of the grand jury secrecy rules. But we view you and your office as ultimately the victims of crimes, because that's what you are, and victims have certain rights, and we will work to vindicate those rights. And if the investigation leads to criminal charges, one thing we'll try to do is work to obtain restitution for your state directly, or in some cases, leave the door open for your Office of Attorney General. Maybe the state laws are better. There are places where the state laws are better. You want to sue in state court. You don't want to just like get a restitution. Go to state court. You're going to get a better outcome in terms of money back.
So along those lines, we got a question. Does the strike force have jurisdiction over procurements where no federal funding is involved?
It's a good question.
If not, what state law enforcement agencies do?
It's a good question. Title 15 of the United States Code, Section 1 and Section 2, is the Sherman Antitrust Act, and it has been in law since 1890. It applies to the free market of the United States, full stop. So if an asphalt company, and I don't mean to pick on asphalt companies,
You really seem like maybe you don't like asphalt
I
companies.
was on a road crew like back in my late teens, early 20s. I actually worked at an asphalt
Okay,
company.
all right. Insider then.
Yeah.
You're an insider. Yeah.
Slow, stop, trust me. I wasn't doing anything I was an unskilled laborer. That was my job title, and the emphasis was on unskilled. If an asphalt company fixed prices or rigs bids for the Walmart parking lot, for the city of New Orleans, for Poydras Street, or for Interstate 4 I came in on?
10?
Interstate 10 has federal funding. It's a felony. It applies to the market everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's federally funded or not. If it's federally funded, I actually have some additional charges I can bring. I can bring in wire fraud. I can bring in mail fraud. I can bring in theft or bribery from a federally funded program. But the Heartland Antitrust statute, the Sherman Act, it applies to the market generally. It's part of like the bedrock economic charter of this country, which is competition and free and fair markets, or as close to that as we can get. So it does not matter. Now that's as a matter of law, and sort of what we'll say is like a complete technical violation. What cases are actually brought? There are going to be a host of factors, but so the examples I listed all had some indirect or direct federal funding, but I have plenty of other examples where they do not have direct federal funding, and we're still sort of bringing the charges.
Okay. This is a great question. Are there contract or scope terms that you recommend for contracts with cloud-based procurement platforms to make sure that the access to the data inside the ERP you need is preserved for investigation, and how long would those records need to be retained?
It's a really good question, and I said I wouldn't get into deep of water. When we're talking about sort of the actual terms you'd negotiate for a cloud e-procurement service, I'm definitely outside my area of expertise. But one thing I have found out from a number of conversations, and this isn't being recorded, right?
This is not being recorded.
I'll speak from at the federal government level. It is shocking and kind of disappointing how little of our procurement information is actually being retained. It's something we keep banging the gong about, where only the winning bid in the contract is kept. And what rings in my ear is the words of a very good defense attorney in a case where we got a not guilty, who said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they brought a bid rigging case, but they don't have the losing bids. How can y'all convict when they don't have the losing bids?" And he was right, and the jury didn't.
No body, no crime.
No body, no crime. Exactly. So that is sticking in my head as I think about this. The actual specific terms, like, I'm absolutely not an expert. But what I would want is sort of your IP, sort of the access logs for some sort of period of time. The statute of limitations on a Sherman Act offense is 5 years. So I don't know how realistic that is. I don't know how often the logs are sort of flushed or overwritten. But I'd want to go back more than 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. I'd want to see this iterative process play out. I'd want winning and losing bids kept for several years, because this is a pattern crime. It's not a one-off crime. You'll want your cloud service provider to provide it and retain it and and provide you access to it. There was, and just to show you, like, sort of like, I'm not the fat and happy Fed where everything is wonderful, and we actually they were going to change the federal acquisition regulation to allow certain kinds of e-procurement service providers at the federal level no longer retain certain bidding data and remove like a right of access to the various parts of the federal government that do the procurement. And I'm happy to report that my team and all of those SEALs you see there all said, "What are you talking about? What, you can't do that. We need all of that data." I don't understand what motivated that proposed change. I can speculate, but I won't. But that is really important. So as you think, so like getting back to the question, we've wandered pretty far from the question.
It's okay. Well, just don't bring up asphalt again.
Yeah, no more asphalt. As I think about the question, I'd want several. I would want a number of years. I'd want your sort of direct access to it. I'd want the IP logs. I'd want the login information. I'd want the account creation information, and then bid submitted. Bid submitted. I'd want all of that retained. Data costs money. I understand that, but I am constantly having to push back against people who act as though it's still 1997 and data is stored on 3.5-inch floppy disks. Data is not that expensive. It's not that difficult, and there's value to retaining it and maintaining it. It's an asset, and I think we as a government, all of us, like we are not using that asset to its fullest potential.
A floppy disk is the save icon for those of you who were born. In,
my Gen X colors are showing. Yeah.
Whew. Oh, that's the save button. I heard someone say, and I cried inside.
Yeah.
Okay. Does it impact an assessment of bid rigging or collusion if the prices are still good and competitive?
No, it's not a defense. Good price, not a defense. Reasonable price, not a defense. Not a legal defense. Is it something we hear? Yes. Is it something that plays in front of a jury? Yeah, it does. It does sometimes. It absolutely does. The government got what they wanted, and it was a good enough price. And that's a real problem. That can be a real. I mean, that can be an issue. So what we tend to look for, it's because it's not an element of the crime. Is we look for consciousness of guilt, conscious of wrongdoing evidence. So people speaking in code, which really happens. People write delete after reading.
Come on.
Yeah. People moving from company email and company phones to Signal, Telegram, other, the disappearing apps. People saying words to the effect of, don't make it an even 10%, otherwise it'll be suspicious. So again, those aren't elements of the crime is an agreement. The general intent and two or more competitors. Those are the elements of the offense.
So that's what I was going to say. Is you said something to me one time many years ago that every collusion started with a conversation.
Yeah.
Just a conversation
Yeah.
at an airport bar, in a hotel bar.
Yeah.
And then you're off to the races before you know it. So I just wanted to touch on that a little
Yeah.
bit.
So I mean, this should all resonate with everyone here. If you're at an industry conference, you're all at a public procurement conference, but every industry has conferences just like this. I mean, not just like this, but sort of the logistics are the same.
They're not as good as this.
They're not as good as this, and they don't have walk-on music like that. But everyone will meet after the conference at the hotel, the lobby bar, have a drink. You'll have that first drink. You'll talk about sports, weather. Hopefully you stay away from politics or religion. You don't want to talk about those these days.
Or money.
One drink leads to two.
Asphalt.
Or asphalt. But one drink leads to two, which leads to three. And it's the most natural thing to talk about what you do for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Well, you talk about work, the things you have in common. I'm guessing everyone here has talked with someone in the past 2 days about work, about what they do, where they do it. And 3 drinks leads to 4. And that 4th drink, maybe that's the tipping point. Start talking about, they're really beating us up on prices this year, and I'm going to have trouble making my numbers, and my sales VP is hounding me, and man, I wish there was something I could do. 4 drinks turns to 5. 5 drinks turns to 6. And the conversation continues. Like, man, I wish there was something I could do. I love you, man. You're my friend. You're my buddy. I want to be closer to you than I am to any of my customers. That's an actual quote from an undercover video the FBI took. I want to be closer to you than I am to any of my customers. There is something. Oh, man, we could do something. We could agree on what the prices will be. You in? I'm in. As soon as you have that agreement, you technically have a federal felony 10-year prison term. Now, I want to be clear that that's not a great case to prosecute. 2 drunk guys at a bar saying I'm in, who then never fix the prices. I need them to fix the prices because that provides evidence of the agreement. I want one of them to cheat on the price fixing agreement, because when people cheat, there are all kinds of incriminating conversations that happen. I want the prices to go up so that I can show harm to a jury. It's not a required element of the offense, but juries, again, we're prosecuting crime, so it's 12 people, 12 regular citizens, and the burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. So I want to show harm. I want to show speaking in code. I want to show, this actually happened in a state somewhere in the middle of the country, I won't say which. I want someone to take boxes and boxes of files and make a bonfire at their trailer somewhere in the country. Like, that's the kind of stuff I want. Not required. It's not a requirement for the crime, but it's going to make a jury convicting someone very, it's going to convince and persuade a jury.
Where would one find colluders if one was looking? Inside the agency? Outside the agency?
The answer is yes.
Yes, and?
Yes, and. I would love to tell you that it's never inside your agency. But like in Scream, sometimes the call's coming from inside the house. Sometimes there are bad apples. There are bad apples everywhere. There are bad apples in the Department of Justice. There are bad apples in every government agency. On the whole, the kind of crimes I'm looking at come from outside, directed inward. But sometimes they have help. I mentioned the Caltrans case. This is the California Department of Transportation, and it was construction of various kinds of construction in California. And here the call was coming from inside the house, Megan. It really was. You had a contracting officer who demanded a quote-unquote sales commission from contractors to sort of decide who was going to win. And two contractors agreed, and it started not with it started with a conversation, but it started with like penny ante stuff. These are construction companies, some remodeling, some work at home. One of the sales commissions was the installation of a floor safe. That'll be important in a minute. And it then moved up to bottles of wine. Nice bottles. I work for the government just like every one of you. I think a $100 bottle of wine is kind of a special occasion bottle of wine, like $100 bottles of wine by the crate. That's what the sales commission became. Then it became a new car for the state employee's wife. Then it just turned into bags of cash, dropped off at Starbucks. And I'm $90,000 in a bag of cash, $37,000 in a bag of cash. How do I know this? Because our state employee, he was diligent about something. He was diligent about his bribery ledger. I'm sorry, his commissions ledger, but it's a bribe, and that's what it was. And this conspiracy would not have been able to exist the way it did for as long as it did without the contract officer on the inside helping rotate these bids. And these outside contractors also decided, oh, wow, this is working. We can just do this without paying a sales commission. So they kind of went off and freelanced on their own. At the end of the day, the state contract officer and the presidents of two different construction companies were all charged with various federal offenses. They are all now, they've reported, they are all now guests of the United States Bureau of Prisons. That's a polite way of saying they are inmates. One of them, the ringleader, the most culpable, is going to spend 78 months in federal prison. That's 6.5 years. There's no such thing as parole in the federal system.
Federal prison is the bad one.
Well, actually, I had a conversation with someone last night. It's like, it's a country club. And listen, maybe it's not as bad as Angola, the Louisiana state prison, but I've been inside a federal prison, and even though I knew I was leaving at the end of the day, when that door clanks, man, you're deprived of your freedom. So that story is a long way of saying it can come from inside the agency, but what I don't want to do is sort of leave people with the idea that it's always coming from inside the agency. The vast majority of the cases that my team works on, we're dealing with good, honest, ethical, sometimes frazzled, harried, way too busy procurement officers and procurement agencies that want to do the right thing, and there's no money changing hands. But yeah, it has happened. The other thing is, that was an example. In California, I don't know the specifics, but state law is better than federal law, so we didn't get restitution. We didn't seek like special restitution. We got a whole bunch of fine. We got like a $2 million fine against one of these CEOs. I heard the state of California, its Office of Attorney General, is going after these people, going after the contractors to like recapture some of the money. So that money will go back. Now, I don't know if it goes back to Caltrans. Probably just goes back into the general fund, which isn't as good. But like,
It's something.
it's something. Yeah.
So someone's funny. What happens at drink 7? That's the one you have before you go to federal prison?
Yeah, drink 7 is
The
the
last
one.
drink?
Drink 7 is the one that happens the Saturday night before the Monday jury selection in your federal criminal trial.
Yep.
And drink 7 is this oddly clarifying drink, because a lot of times it's like, for those of you who are lawyers and have ever had any kind of practice that looks like litigation, like you do all the work. The Saturday before trial, the work is done. You've practiced your opening. You've got your direct witness examinations. Your evidence is lined up. And the defendant comes in Monday morning. The defense attorney calls you Sunday, says, my guy wants to take a plea. He wants to plead. And I have an obligation. I have an obligation to my client, which is the flag and the eagle, and like to justice, like, okay, if your guy wants to plead, I'll make a fair, reasonable plea offer. But part of me's like, I've done all the work. Let me get up and get it.
That's why you do civil litigation, Dan. You don't have to settle.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, we're going to trial, my friend.
Yeah, yeah. There's something very, very clarifying. I've talked a lot about individuals today. I'll say the other thing we do, and I'm really proud of this. And this stat goes back decades. We don't just charge individuals; we charge companies. On the other hand, we don't just charge companies; we charge individuals. Like I think it's important to charge both. Companies act through individuals, and what I don't want it to be is just a company paying a fine as the cost of doing business. If you've got a culpable executive, I want that person to think about this as part of their rational calculus. It's not a crime of passion. It's bittering is not a crime of passion. So as you're thinking about the cost and benefit, I want you to think about that door clanking. And Lompoc, California, Federal Correctional Institution, Lompoc, it may not be Angola, but that door clanks. I want people to think about that.
Is the government a person under the Sherman Antitrust Act? Are there antitrust issues the government should be aware and steer clear of?
Is the government a person?
Under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Oh, so I guess it's a standing question.
Yeah, I think it's a standing question. I think it's also a question about whether governments can collude. And this is definitely a little esoteric, but generally the government is not a person under the Sherman Antitrust Act for the purposes. There's part of the act called Act Para, which deals with detrebling damages and making them single as opposed to joint and several. And essentially, the government is not a person. So if you're concerned, if you're hearing what I'm saying, you're like, oh man, what about our purchasing cooperatives? Is that a crime? That's not what we're talking about. And also, purchasing cooperatives would be otherwise carved out. There are. And this gets into sort of like the civil antitrust laws and recovery under civil theories, which is not my area of expertise. But there are a number of ways that the government, state, local, even federal, I'll stay away from the federal because it's a separate law, but state and local can recover for their damages. States can and often do parens patriae litigation, where you're basically standing in the shoes of the citizens of your state to recover, and also almost always recover something for the state. I mean, the examples I can think of involve the various parts going into automobiles. There was a massive global price-fixing conspiracy, and so multiple states sued, one, because they buy vehicles and they'd like to recover their damages. They also sued in parens patriae, like on behalf and in the shoes of the various citizens of those states. It's sort of like a way of doing class action. And now I'm definitely in the deep water. I'm not a civil attorney. So
That's a good question, though.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yep. Remember when Vice President Agnew took a plea deal for taking kickbacks from contractors?
I mean, I don't remember that because
Oh my
I'm on
God,
the
it was
young end of
crazy.
Gen X, but I'm aware of that happening, which
That's
is
the
why
question.
I do remember. I mean, I don't remember that, but that's why we had Gerald Ford as vice president, and who then became president. Yes.
Indeed. Some history buff in here has got a good tale to tell.
Yeah. I mean, let's go back further. I mean, what we're talking about goes back to 1890. It goes back to John D. Rockefeller. It goes back to Teddy Roosevelt. Not the rough riding Teddy Roosevelt, but the trust-busting Teddy Roosevelt, the bull moose, the progressives. I mean, this stuff has been around for a long time. So I love the history.
All right. we've only got time for maybe 2 more. So one, I'm going to have to read this because it just made me laugh. Do you also harbor resentments for other road-based products like cement? Thank you. The hard-hitting questions are I think the press is here.
As someone who worked on an asphalt crew, I will tell you that asphalt is the superior paving material. It doesn't crack. It's smooth. It can be infinitely replaced. And it's a recyclable product.
Aren't you glad you asked that question, person?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go back for a second. I want to freak everybody out. And I spent some time doing math, so I'm really proud of myself.
Oh.
So the 20...
Did I mention I have a degree in political science?
You did.
Which means I am
I have
not
a
good at
philosophy degree, so
So
come
you're
on.
worse at math
I'm
than
worse.
I am. Yeah, okay.
So philosophically, okay, 20% of the overall spending, that's $240 billion, right? Okay. So that's Elon Musk's net worth. That's a ridiculous amount of money.
Wait, his net worth is
$240 billion.
Are you kidding me?
No.
Wait, it's less after his purchase of Twitter. I'm sorry,
Probably.
X, formerly known as Twitter.
That was a bad deal.
Okay.
It is hard to imagine that much money, so I'm going to help. 1 million pennies stacked on top of each other. Mm-hmm. That would be 1 mile high. That's 4 times higher than the Empire State Building. That's 1 million pennies stacked on top of each other.
Wow.
1 billion pennies would be 870 miles high. That's the difference between 1 million and 1 billion. 870 miles high is 158 times higher than Mount Everest. So that's 240 times 870 miles. And I went to law school because I thought there would be no math.
Yeah, this is.
But I say all of that to say that that is an insane amount of money. And to get back to Dan's point earlier, your job is to sort of be the guardians, right?
Yeah.
So I just want everyone to sort of feel the weight of that for a second, how much money that is and how much good that money could do if it didn't go to these bad actors. So along those lines, Dan, if anyone in this room wanted their staff to hear the things that we have talked about today, how would they do that?
Well, we have a number of resources on our public website. If you were to Google Procurement Collusion Strike Force, you'll come to our website. We have some, like, a primer for criminal antitrust law. There's it's a bit out of date video, YouTube video. There are some other things, but you could also reach out to us, pcsf@usdoj.gov, if you're looking for training. You can see we have people, not in every state, but in a number of states. We're also trying to, I've been spending some time, and the person who has a new position I spoke about, I'm trying to get him to think about sort of ways to sort of reach as many people as possible, because while I would love to say we can come to all 50 states, every Department of Administration in all 50 states, the reality is at some point I need the people to be investigating and prosecuting crimes as well. So if there are ways we can do bang for the buck or sort of like regional things, I'm open to that. But if you email us at pcsf@usdoj.gov, that address again is pcsf@usdoj.gov.
pcsf@usdoj.gov.
We would be happy to sort of provide it. Also, an easy way to get in touch with. I think I have something. Maybe can you tell me if I have a problem or what you think? That's also a great way to just sort of reach out. You don't have to provide a whole bunch of details in writing. Just sort of we'll have someone get in touch.
All right, awesome. You guys, I didn't even have to use my prepared questions because you guys had so many good ones.
There was one question I wanted you to ask me.
Okay, with the movie or the Star Wars thing?
Star Wars.
What is the best Star Wars movie, and why is it The Empire Strikes Back?
First of all, the rebellion has an ethos, but they don't have a plan to govern. Say what you will about the Empire. I at least know how they're going to govern. Point one. Point two.
So you're an order Muppet, not a chaos Muppet.
Also, the only credited answer is Rogue One. It's the best Star Wars movie. It's better than
come on.
Absolutely.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
All right, we'll meet out in the lobby and we'll have a gang fight about this, okay? So thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
I enjoyed our non-fire fireside chat. It was not toasty at all.